Hello, micro folks. This is Mr. Hooker, and today we are looking at oligopoly, one of the imperfect competition market structures. So, this one you can look at a couple of different ways, but we don't typically use demand and supply to look at it. So, it's kind of interesting. And in certain with certain business schools, graduate programs, they will have full 16-week classes dedicated to the structures of how we analyze oligopoly, just because it is such an important market structure. Kind of crazy. And there's a lot of firms in it. So, I mean, it's like 1,000, but I mean, the firms that are in it are so prevalent in US society. Um, that it is a big deal to analyze them. So let's go. So an oligopoly is a market dominated by a small number of firms. Um, Firm in that industry is an oligopolist. Economists refer to the situation in which firms compete, but also possess the market power which enables them to affect market prices as imperfect competition. So the two types of imperfect competition that we'll discuss this chapter and next are oligopoly and monopolistic competition. So there we go. Why are oligopolies so prevalent? Oligopoly is the result of the factors that produce monopoly, but just didn't completely form. So it's just like an almost monopoly is basically it. That's what's happening. Um, the most important one is the existence of economies of scale. When they're really strong, they lead to monopoly. When they're kind of strong, they lead to oligopoly. So the thing we're going to look at is what we call the HERF. It's just the Herfindahl-Hirschman index, or the HHI. There's also another index that goes to this, and it's called the four firm concentration ratio. We'll talk about that after we get done with the HERF. All right. So the HHI for an industry is the sum of squares of every firm in the industry's market share. All right. So if there are three firms and they have 60%, 25%, and 15% of market share, you square 60, 25, and 15, and you get 4450. So this is a very like a very concentrated market. So the way this looks, and they have it broken down for you pretty well here. Less than 1,000 is a competitive market. 1,000 to 1,800 is somewhat competitive market. Anything above 1,800 is an oligopoly. So in the course around this, right around these files, I have for you the DOJ um, guidelines for mergers. So when two oligopolies or two firms, period, want to merge, they the DOJ and the FTC look at these guidelines and they say, well, like, what is the HERF for this industry? How much will this increase the concentration, et cetera, et cetera. So I have the past two guidelines. The one from, I think it's 2010, has more of the math in it. And the latest one, and it's pretty clear cut. Like it has all of the math of like, these are the Herfindahl indexes we look at, the Herfindahl-Hirschman indexes we look at. And if it increases by this much, this is what's going to happen. The latest one is really kind of more of a feely kind of guideline. And there's been a lot of complaining about the recent changes in the way that mergers have been handled because it's kind of like, whatever, nobody cares. It's a thing. Um, just like if you look at how many companies T-Mobile has bought just in the past, I think T-Mobile's had some like six mergers in the past 7 years. So, yeah, this is 2026. I think they've had six mergers in 7 years. So yeah, it's a thing that they're not really going by the guidelines they had in 2010 anymore. And so the 2024 guidelines are more kind of they're not as numeric anymore. They're just kind of like, we're kind of feely. If it feels okay, we'll do it, and if not, we might say something. And that's a problem for some people. Other people are like, yeah, it's okay. It's a thing. So, uh, and I'll let you look at them and think, see what you think. Um, so oligopolists operate in a state of interdependence. So we call this mutual interdependence. So you're going to determine your actions based on the actions of um, what you believe your competitors are going to do, as well as what is best for you. So the decisions of your firm affect the profits of your rivals. So the oligopoly, consisting of only two firms, is a duopoly, and each firm is known as a duopolist. So sellers engage in collusion when they cooperate to raise their joint profits, and a cartel is an agreement among several producers to obey output restrictions in order to increase their joint profits. Um, the world's most famous cartel is OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Um, so collusion and competition. Will oligopolists engage in collusion or non-cooperative behavior? Probably, at some point. Non-cooperative behavior, each firm acts in its own self-interest, and firms ignore the effects of their actions on each other's profits. Can collusion between the firms is illegal, but sometimes firms ignore the rules and collude. Like if you can make more profit than you're going to pay in fines, it's probably better for you to collude. You just have to understand how those rules are built, right? By acting as if they were single monopolists, oligopolists form that cartel, and each firm has an incentive to cheat and produce more. So there are two principal outcomes: successful collusion or behaving non-cooperatively and cheating. So like even for OPEC, Nigeria is in OPEC and they're a really poor country and they don't produce that much oil anyway, really. So everybody in OPEC knows that Nigeria is going to cheat. They're going to be like, yep, we'll produce what you tell us to produce, but then they are going to go out and they're going to produce as much oil as they can, which isn't really all that much, but they're going to produce as much as they can because they need all the money they can get. So that is offset by Saudi Arabia, who can produce as much as they want or as little as they want, and they've got enough in reserve to just offset anything they need to. So Saudi Arabia just fixes that problem, does what they got to do, and bam, it's all done. So yeah, it's fine. Nobody cares. So the games they play, each oligopolist realizes that it is interdependent. Its profit depends on what its competitor does, and its competitor's profit depends on what it does. So the firms are playing a game in which the profit of each player depends not only on its own actions, but those of the other players. To understand how they behave, economists and mathematicians have developed game theory. So, actually, one of the most famous of these is John Nash. The movie Beautiful Mind was about him. He was not an economist, he was a mathematician. Um, so, this is all about game theory, which is the study of behavior in situations of interdependence and a way of predicting outcomes in strategic situations like oligopoly. So the most famous game theory is the prisoner's dilemma, where you have a reward received by a player in a game, such as the profit earned by an oligopolist, is that player's payoff. So we use payoff matrices to do this. And a payoff matrix shows how the payoff to each of the participants in a two-player game depends on the actions of both. So what we've got is like Thelma and Louise are caught by the cops. The police put them in two separate cells, say if neither one of you confess, we'll send you to jail for 5 years. Because really all we got is a gunshot, right? So if you confess and you implicate your partner and they don't, we'll do the same. We'll reduce your sentence to 5 years from 5 years to 2. But if your partner confesses and you don't, you get the maximum 20 years. If both of you confess, we'll give you both 15 years. If you both remain silent, we'll give each of you 5 years. So how does that look? Oops. Um, so did they not give me the whole thing? They did. All right. Yeah, these things aren't that. So if you got Louise on the top, Thelma on the bottom, if Thelma confesses, if Thelma doesn't confess and Louise doesn't confess, um, they're both going to get 5 year sentences. If Thelma doesn't confess and Louise does confess, then Louise is going to get 2 years and Thelma's going to get 20. But if Thelma confesses and Louise doesn't confess, Thelma's going to get the 2 years and Louise is going to get 20. And then if they both confess, they're both going to get 15 years. That's how that works out. And I know half of it's missing, but it was in the last slide. And as you can see, that's there. And then that whole slide is missing. Um, thank you, McMillan. All right. So what's going to happen? Both prisoners are going to confess. Why? And you have to go with what you know, what is really there. So you look at it from the side of take one person at a time and look at what they would do based on the other person. So if, and we look at Louise first. Louise looks at it and says, okay, if I have the option of getting 5 years or 20 years, or wait a minute, I have the option of getting, yeah, oh, 2 years. It's going to be 2 years or 5 years. So I have the option of getting 2 years or 5 years. And so I'd take 2 years. So I would confess. And then on the other side, if for Louise, if Thelma doesn't confess, that she could get 5. If Thelma doesn't confess, she gets 5 years. If she confesses and Thelma doesn't confess, she gets 2 years. So she would confess and get a 2 year. If Thelma confesses, she has the option of getting 20 years or getting 15 years. So she would confess and get the 15 years. So her dominant strategy is to confess. And the dominant strategy is what you would do no matter what the other person does. Thelma has that same option. So she would also confess. So they both have the dominant strategy to confess. So to confess is a dominant strategy, which is your best action regardless of the action taken by the other player. So the prisoner's dilemma is the situation where each player has an incentive to cheat, and both players end up being worse off because you're better off not confessing. So the Nash equilibrium, also known as a non-cooperative equilibrium, results when each player chooses the action that maximizes their payoff, given the actions the other players, ignoring the effects of the action on their payoffs received by the other players. Gains based on these two premises. Each player has an incentive to choose an action that benefits them at the other player's expense. When both players act in this way, both are worse off than if they'd acted cooperatively. They don't have the option to cooperate. So here's one with profits. So you want the most profit possible. So we have Hitachi and Bridgestone. Um, so if they each have an option of making 30 million or 40 million tires, if Bridgestone makes 30 million tires, Hitachi could make $180 million profit or 200 million profit. Of course, they're going to take 200 million in profit. If Bridgestone makes 40 million tires, Hitachi could make 150 million in profit or 160 million in profit. Of course, they're going to take the 160 million in profit. So they're going to make 40 million tires. Same thing for Bridgestone. If Hitachi makes 30 million, Bridgestone can make 180 or 200. They're going to make 200. And if Hitachi makes 40 million, they could make 150 or 160. So of course they're going to make 160. So we're going to end up down here at 160, 160, when actually they'd have been better off here at 3030 with 180, 180. Okay. What they were hoping for is one of these two where it was 200, 150, but yeah, that didn't happen. So that's how that works out. So we're going to stop right there and I will pick up right here in the next video. See y'all there.